The number one question I get asked is, how do I make a course about insert awful dry content here engaging for the learner? And my answer is always that you have to turn your content into a series of challenges through which they will figure out your content for themselves. But you're probably still wondering, yeah, but how exactly do I do that? Which is why today I want to walk you step by step through the method you can use to turn any content into a series of fun, relevant challenges. In 10 years of doing this, I've found that relevant activity and problem solving is pretty much the gold standard of gamification and of training because it treats the learner like they're clever enough to problem solve, which not only engages them, but it also creates amazing real-world impact for your clients or your company. And if you're here because you're serious about creating e-learning that's fun for the learner and impactful for your company, then you definitely want to check out my program, The Effective Gamification Framework. You can find a link to that in the description below. And now let's look at the method to turn any learning objective into an active challenge. The first thing you need to do is to make sure that your training is aiming at the right thing. So we start with the end in mind. And I'm not talking about the learning objective here. I'm talking about the real world change that you want to make. Figure out why your client needs this program in the first place. What problem are they trying to solve? What real world change are they trying to make? And then you figure out what the real behaviors are that need to happen in order for this real world result to occur. These are observable behaviors and they're what we're going to use as our learning objectives. If this reminds you of Kathy Moore's action mapping, that's not an accident. Her method perfectly captures the art of making relevant learning objectives and taking a huge content dump and boiling it down into what's actually going to make a difference. Some of you might say, yeah, but my course isn't aiming to change behavior. They just need to know all this stuff for compliance. And I'm going to deal with that later in this video. So once you've got your real world observable behaviors, one thing that often goes by the wayside is the real world context. Under what circumstances do your learners have to perform these desired behaviors? And why aren't they doing it right now? Are they missing knowledge, practice, or is there an obstacle in the way? This is so important because a lot of the time learners already have most of what they need, but they just don't apply their knowledge because of circumstances. For example, let's say a nurse makes a mistake and gives the patient the wrong drug or dosage. That's probably not a lack of knowledge. She probably knows how to read the patient's chart, but the mistake happens because of circumstances like the need to rush, or maybe the patient's being aggressive and disruptive and that's making her frazzled. So if you're just quizzing her about how to read a patient chart, that quiz is different from real life in all sorts of ways, so it's unlikely that success in that quiz will correlate with success in real life, so your training isn't likely to reduce those mistakes. Now, if your training isn't there to solve a problem and the learner just needs to know this stuff, then you're not really aiming at a change, but you can still think of what's the worst that can happen when nobody knows this stuff versus the best when everyone does. How do people behave when they don't have this know-how versus what they do, and what's the impact of the two? So having your real-world desired behavior and your real-world circumstances helps you design your relevant final challenge. This is what they should be able to do perfectly if they've reached a learning objective when they finish your course. So this test should be something that your learners cannot do right now at the beginning of the training. If they can already do it, then there's no point in training them. She already can read the chart. A good final challenge puts the learner through the gauntlet of what they're actually going to face in the real world, including the real obstacles, the disruption, the time crunch, so that it's an accurate representation of what they're going to have to do in real life and the context in which they'll have to do it. And another thing that the best challenges do is that they lead to a range of possible outcomes. So that means it's not just pass-fail, but you can do more or less well on it. If you design changes with a range of outcomes, you're going to have an easier time accurately measuring gradual improvements and celebrating them, and adjusting difficulty to each learner, as well as a whole host of other great things. So if you design a final challenge that ticks all those boxes, then success in the game you build will very closely correlate with success in the real world. In other words, your program will actually be relevant. So think about how you can put the learner in a situation that either simulates the real world and its obstacles, or elicits the same difficulty and requires the same skill. And as soon as you have your idea of what your final challenge should be, start building. No storyboarding, no written documents that nobody's going to read. Get playable, if only just for yourself. Build a very simple, quick and dirty prototype of this final challenge. And what I mean by quick and dirty is your prototype should allow the user to try the task and get a verdict, get an idea of how well they did. In terms of the interface, it just needs to be understandable, not pretty. We need good UX here, which means that people intuitively understand what their goal is and how well they're doing just by looking at the thing, but we don't need polish. We don't need it to be beautiful at this point. Now, a lot of people will make it beautiful anyway because what's the harm, right? But making things too beautiful early in the process does hurt. It not only costs you time, but it causes all sorts of problems with the rest of the process, including the next step, which is user testing. So ideally, once you have a functional and clear prototype, you'll want to put it in the learner's hands. Remember that this is a final challenge, so if most people can pass it, you have a problem. If they can't, that's fine. They're not supposed to. They haven't been trained on this yet. And this is an honest test of what they'll face in the real life. I can make a whole video about user testing, but at the very least, your user test should let you know if people understand the task and give you a baseline performance for your average learner before they've been trained. So once you've confirmed that you have an honest final test that your target audience cannot pass without training, it's time to create the active learning string. This is the path that will put them through, starting from where they are, all the way to being able to pass your final test with flying colors. The active learning string is a series of challenges of increasing difficulty that lead up to that final one that you've already built. Oftentimes, they'll just be a watered down version of that final challenge. What you do here exactly depends on the nature of your final challenge. If you're doing a skill challenge where people have to build up speed or accuracy, you can give them less or less time or gradually reduce the margin for error. If it's knowledge, then you can start by giving them a lot of extra information, a lot of hints, and gradually reduce the amount of help and guidance you give. The important idea here is that all the way through this, you're always asking the learner to do something relevant. You're never explaining, you're always challenging. It's just that at the beginning, you'll bring down the difficulty down to a level where any untrained newbie can figure it out. The challenges in your active learning string will play different roles. Some are there to introduce new information or add complexity. Others are there just for practice, so it's not introducing anything. It's just there so that the learner can get faster or more accurate. And you'll also have challenges that are there to combine different concepts together. So each learning string will introduce a concept or a skill in isolation. This one teaches you how to figure out the right product for the customer, and this one is about how to deal with a disruptive customer. And once you've mastered each one separately, you can have a combined challenge where they figure out the right product for a disruptive customer. So you use the challenge types that you need, kind of like Lego blocks, to mirror the structure of your content and create the ideal path for your learner based on your objectives. Like I said, this is what I've found over 10 years to be not only the most effective type of gamification, but the most effective type of training, period. It actually works and it's way more fun for the learner. But most people do not turn their content into challenges. They just keep their training as is and they slap some rewards on top of it. That might have worked 10 years ago, but audiences are getting way more sophisticated now and they can feel when they're being manipulated with a cheap gimmick. We're over that. So designers have to make that shift into active learning. But if there's one thing I want to leave you with in this video, is that you can do this. There are as many ways to do this as there are learning goals and contexts and obstacles out there. And we've had people in our program who were really given some seriously dry and theoretical content for compliance and very little time, and they end up moving freaking mountains when they make that shift and they transform the way they present content. So I hope this method is helpful to you, and either way, I'd love to support you directly through the program, and that link is in the description. I hope to chat with you soon. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you later.